Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Running and Reaching, the point of sail that Swallow loves best. The forecast for today is northeasterly, 3 to 5, which suits us well. A northeasterly is set in this direction for today. Once we're out the river, we'll be sailing across here to get towards the Menai Straits. That'll give us a broad reach. Halfway across the sands just here, we'll get a bit of a beam reach in for a bit. That'll probably be our fastest point of sail. And then we got a dead run all the way down to Caernarfon, except for the bends in the straits, that is. This is our destination, Caernarfon just here. The whole sail's going to be about 22 nautical miles from start to finish, and that's accounting that we're cutting across the sandbanks along the way as well. So we get out of the marina and then we start motoring down the river, with Lisa pulling tongues at the helm.
It's okay, it's on.
The engine and the little bit of ebb at the top of tide has just carried us down the river in 10 minutes, so it's definitely time to get the sails up now. As the wind is still ahead of the beam, may as well get the mainsail up first. She's dead easy to put up, my mainsail. You just yank on the out haul and out she comes. You're supposed to loosen the main sheet. There you go. I haven't done it, but I have now, and that'll make life a little bit easier. I'm asking Lisa to turn up into the wind and she's going, well, that's the wrong way. We're supposed to be going the other way. It would have been a little bit easier, that's all, for me to yank on the out haul should we be more into the wind. Right, I suppose we best get back on course now. As Lisa starts rounding us to port, I start feeding the main sheet out so the sail can fill and start powering us up. Under me boom there is one of my friends, Mike, passing on Laura, and he shouts at me, your fender's out. And I didn't know I had a fender out, but there you go, there's a fender out. There's a fender back in now. And I think Lisa's getting close to that red buoy. Think it's time that we got the Genoa out and turn that engine out of gear and into neutral, I think. Don't need that no more. Both seats are still wound up, nothing's prepared here, but it's only a second to get the Genoa out. As I'm pulling the Genoa out, I can feel the pressure of the wind filling it, so we're going to go quite well, I'm sure. The wind's in this direction now as well, and that means we're on a broad reach. A broad reach is the last point where both sails can fill on the same side of the boat with wind. After that you become a run. All I have to do now is feather off the prop. This is done by putting the gear into reverse and then back into neutral. That's us underway, 4.3 knots. Nothing over the ground yet because the GPS hasn't woken up. The sun is shining. The wind is blowing, the sea is flat. This is set to look like a nice bit of voyage, and only 21 miles to go out of our 22. It looks like the weather forecast's correct. And if this holds out for the day, it looks like it's going to be a cracking day. Well, we're not really pushed for time much today. We've got a lot of time to get there because we've got shallows at the other end to worry about, which could make us take our time a little bit more. You sort of get the feeling when everything's working just right that it's going to be a really good day. Swallow's slipping along beautifully, 4.6 knots through the water, and she's hardly making a ripple, and she's standing up vertical, so everything's very comfortable on board. Temperature's about 11 degrees, 12 degrees, so it's not really a hot day, that's why we're still coated up. And there ain't that many boats out, but I can see one down there behind us in our wake. It's called October. There she is, sailing out of Conway. We're doing over 5 knots now through the water, and it says we're doing over 5 knots over the ground, but an extra half a knot. Well, I'm not sure if that's tide or not because we shouldn't have any at this point. We're on top of the sandbanks and we're making our way straight across. We've left the buoyage now. Oh, and we're losing a bit of wind off that foresail. That's just because it's hiding behind the main a little. You could probably say we were on more of a starboard run than a broad reach, but it's more probably likely the size of the Genoa that lets the end of it flicker a little bit. Well, we're ploughing along now. The boat's still flat and the water's still flat, but the wind's got us and we're well on our way. It's a Friday lunchtime, it is, just before bank holiday, just before the bank holiday weekend, the beginning of May. And as it's such a lovely sunny day, with nice airs, nothing above a 5, I'd have expected to see a lot more boats out than just us in October. Hardly a ripple at my silent stern. Well, we slide past the pen outfall marker, and you can see the speed the land slips by behind that. Well, October's a great big fast boat back there in the background, so if she's coming the same way, I don't think it'll be too long before she passes us. Our plan anyway, we've got a couple of hours to skip across these banks. We've still got 12 knots of wind up the backside, and we're still doing, well, 4.5 to 5 knots over the ground. Yeah, we're still getting about 4.5 knots through the water, which is fine by me. It's in the right direction and it's still smooth, quick passage. Swallows enjoying shoving the water aside with their broad reach, banging them nautical miles under her keel. Boy, she loves it. Well, looking at our plan now, we've got to get across some sandbanks ahead of us, and we have to do that before half tide, otherwise we'll get stuck on the sandbanks. The sandbanks are called Caernarfon sands. They are, if you like, the bit that separates Conway Bay from the Menai Straits. Well, rather than going round Puffin Island, you can cut across them banks using an area called the Pool, feeding into the Swatch. And you should hopefully come out by B6 on the Menai Straits. That shortcut across the banks though is a half tide shortcut. Once half tide's gone you'll run aground. So at about 3 hours after high you've got about 1 metre of water left on the banks. So remember that if you're doing it. That's mainland Anglesey up ahead of us there. And if I pan round you can see Puffin Island and the Sound Gap over there. So we're just sort of starting towards to get to the bank area now. But you can't see anything down there except my feet. And Swallow slipping along beautifully. The breeze is up a little bit at the moment. I think we've got about 22 knots. The sea state's still fairly slight. And I don't presume it's going to build any more than this, so it's going to stay comfortable all the way, I think. We're making about 5 knots over the ground now. Well, we're making about 5 knots through the water as well. Which, if you've ever watched me, you know 5 knots is my happy point, if I can get there. Now you can see a couple of turns in the foresail there. That's not because I thought Swallow was overpowered on a broad reach or anything. It's just that the sail ends, the bit that's hiding behind the main, the leech, it were flapping a little bit because it wasn't getting full wind, so this was in order to shut it up, just wind the leech away a bit by failing it a couple of turns. The power's still up, as you can see. She's absolutely ploughing through the water. And Swallow is so steady, the hull is hardly moving. It's not swaying at all, it's not pitching at all. It's almost like it's still concrete, still like you're on the pavement. She's so solid. Well, this is us now, entering into the pool area. That's the deep bit that takes us through the sands. And we're showing 17-18 knots of apparent wind. It's hitting us at about 45 degrees off our starboard quarter, which is keeping the speed up beautiful. This force 5, I think this is a favourite wind of Swallow's. It seems to need a little bit of blow to get her to go. And to get her almost up to hull speed, it's doing quite well. So let's hope that this stays at about a force 5 for the rest of the journey and we can fly all the way. We're happily leaving Conway in our wake back there. It can enjoy it. We've now got to the part going over the sands where we turn a little bit to starboard, so we're on a bit of a reach, and it says nearing 7 knots over the ground, and we're doing a good 6 knots through the water. So I'm really pleased. She's absolutely creaming along, and over 6 knots is a fantastic pace to be moving at for me. This is reaching. You don't get a faster pace of sail than reaching ordinarily, unless of course your boat can surf and you're surfing downwind. Well, Swallow's never going to surf, so this is as fast as she'll ever go. The wind seems to ease a little bit, but we're still making 6 knots actually through the water, and it's still giving us 6 knots-ish over the ground, so that's not bad. It's actually quite cool outside. I know you don't think it when you see the sunshine, but the 20 knots of wind on about 10 or 11 degrees Celsius cools you down a little bit, or at least it does me. In here, it's lovely and warm, and you still get the same sort of buzz from the sailing. It's just without the cold temperatures. I mean, the doors are open. It just stops the wind whistling straight through you, because when you go outside, you actually feel the pressure in it with the cold in it. This is panning out to be one of the best sails we've had this year. We're looking like we're going to carry this wind all day, and that's going to be really nice to get to where we want to go. Although you can see the land ahead of us, we've just got to go across the sandbanks in front of us now to get to it. And when we get to that land, there'll be a channel which is crossing us like a letter T in front of us. But when we get to the channel, we're going to turn to port and we're going to run down it. And the run will probably slow us up a bit, because we're actually pushing a little bit of tide here, and we'll be pushing tide as we travel down there most of the way, I should imagine. You can see a yacht in the distance there. That's October, the one that we seen earlier on this morning leaving Conway. Well, he's still coming the same way as us. We've put the main away now, so we're just running on the jib, and that's because the wind was veering a little bit behind us and backing and veering, and it keeps changing the side that the jib wants to be on and makes the boat difficult to steer in a straight line. But when you just go to the one sail, it just sort of drags the boat along easy, and it's not too bothered what the wind's doing. Lisa's decided to have a go at steering, and it's a bit difficult, so she don't want me to record her, so she calls me a name. Neither of us have had a go at steering ever before from the helm inside, so she's doing a grand job really, for the first time doing it, and the conditions aren't perfect. They're a little rolly out to say the least. As we reach Beaumaris, we're still under just the foresail. The tide's ebbing against us, probably about 2 knots, 2.5 knots. So, although we're making our still 5-ish knots through the water, we're only making 2.5 over the ground. But I think we've got plenty of time, so I won't panic just yet. And Beaumaris seems to have got themselves a big wheel to play with. Lovely hazy sunny day behind us, and still leaving a nice little wake in the water. Looks like most of the fifes are out, and scimitars or whatever they are, at the local racing club. So they'll be getting back into action soon. There's not many of the yachts on the moorings though yet. As we get to Gallows Point, the wind seems to die off a little bit. I think Lisa's now starting to get used to the helm, or at least she seems to be settling down with it. We're still slipping along quite happily through the water, and we're still clawing a little bit of ground continuously, so we are getting somewhere. We're managing just under 4 knots really. We're making about 2 over the ground due to the fact that the water's still coming against us underneath us. But it's given us plenty of time. We've got a time gate further along, which is the Swellies. So we're in no rush. We've decided to pick up a mooring for a bit and have some lunch, and maybe wait for the correct time to go through the Swellies. Well, we turn the engine on and put the sail away, and Lisa gets the short straw of standing at the bow. I have the easy job of matching the tide with the wind, so that the boat will settle when it gets there and it won't fall off to port or starboard, and give us a bit of time to actually collect the mooring up. But when Lisa actually goes for the mooring buoy, it keeps disappearing on her as she's trying to grab it, and she has a little bit of trouble getting the hook through it. So I run down to give her a bit of a hand, in the hope that the boat will remain stable while we do it. As you can see, the boat kept a bit of way on, and we more or less nearly rode over the mooring, but it's coming round right now, and she settled back quite quickly on it. So there you go, ready for lunch at least. Anywhere along the Menai Straits is perfect to have a spot of lunch. It's a picturesque place, and the water's normally quite slight in the Menai Straits, 90% of the time anyway. The wind's still blowing where we are at the moment, but it's still going our way, so we get to set off soon. Here comes October now. He's caught us up after all this time, but we've had lunch and he's about to pass us. Well, we drop the mooring and we start slowly slipping down with the wind behind us and the genoa out, but we're not going fast. We're just enjoying the scenery as we make a knot and a half over the ground. October's just ahead of us there. He's dropping his sails for some strange reason. He must be going to have a spot of lunch himself. Nope, he actually looks like he's going to motor back. Well, I thought he was on his way the same way as us through the Swellies. Well, we've got 2.8 knots over the ground now, and we've only got 9 knots of wind, and we're doing over 3 through the water. Pretty good. But that does mean that we're actually punching a bit of current, and I'd have thought to myself it would have been slack about now. Right then, let's get ourselves under that bridge over there and make our way through the Swellies. Just before we go under the bridge and enter the Swellies, you have to pass Menai. Menai's got a jetty that sticks out, and there's normally a big boat on it called the Prince Madach. There's often a place that you can tie up around here and go ashore, and it's a nice little town, Menai. As I get to Menai Bridge, we got a good through the water speed, but we're not making anything over the ground. The water's pouring out of here, and it's supposed to be slack. Well, we've put the motor on because the wind's getting a bit fluky, so we're going to have to push through. Not exactly on just wind, but certainly on wind and motor, so we're going to motor sail this. Now there's a hell of a rip going through. So I go and have a look at my times again, and what do I find? You guessed it. I'm an hour late. An hour late? I don't even know how I got an hour late. We've been sitting there for an hour having lunch. We could have come through on the correct time, but we didn't. Well, we've got to push a bit of water now. I know the Swellies like the back of my hand, so I'm not worried. None of the rocks will have moved. So all we've got to watch out for is we don't hit the bottom anywhere as usual. Now, being an hour late and doing a low water transit anyway means I'm an hour late but an hour lower, so the water's even lower than it would normally be on a low water transit. But still and all, I'm going to stay away from the hard bits and stay in the soft stuff. It's always nice to see Swellies rock at low water, so you know what you're up against when it's not low water. And as we come round Price's Point Corner to line ourselves up, Britannia Bridge is in the distance, and plenty of rocks there to see as well. And now that I've made myself an hour late, I've got plenty of tide to push as well, or ebb to push. But that's not the worst of it. I think the worst of it, well, I've got that all to come. And what I'm actually thinking is now, is my calculations on my depths right through the Menai Straits are all now an hour's less water. And I was thinking I was going to scrape through before. I'm going to be lucky to get through now. It's definitely going to be getting closer than I would have liked for comfort. Don't you just love the colour of that water? I know it's a reflection of the trees, but it adds a nice tone to it. A bit like when it goes blue from the reflection of the sky. You can see you've got a fair distance from these rocks when you're coming through the straits, so they're actually quite hard to fall off the transit and hit them. You've got quite a bit of room. They are not comfortable if you do get over there though, and you do find yourself on top of them. That wouldn't be a good day. There is a nice clear transit line here though when visibility is good. You can just see it ahead of me there in the distance. The shallowest part of the Swellies though is just coming up ahead of me. It's just after that little diamond on the shore. The little diamond on the shore is telling you you can leave the transit line now, or if you're coming the other way, you should be joining the transit line now when you become a beam of it. So although the rocks appear to be disappearing on our starboard side, there'll be some drying areas appearing on our port side that we won't be able to see, just there in the water. So we need to head towards the middle of the bridge more or less here, or heading towards the rock. We're still making over 4 knots through the water. Over the ground, we're only just moving at about a knot. Now a knot's quick enough to get you through here, so just sit on that knot, and it also gives you plenty of time to make decisions as well. But that's because we're pushing current, and that's because of my own fault. I reckon the very first time somebody comes through here, they're looking up at the top of the mast, expecting their aerial at least to scrape the bridge, especially if it's a much bigger boat than we've got. But I think there's a very good air draft here, and there's a very unlikely chance of you touching up there, unless of course you've got an absolute monster. Gnarly rocks them, aren't they? Who's that bloke over there watching me coming out the Swellies? Well, no sooner we get out of the straits and the engine's off and we're under that sail again. Although we're pushing a little bit more current than I'd like to have been pushing now, we're still making headway. And we can't get anywhere for a long time yet, because it's about another 2 hours at least before Caernarfon open up, maybe 3 hours. Well, it's comfortable going with just the Genoa up, and it's easier sailing like that. We're not in a rush. And the funny thing is now, the day has warmed up a hell of a lot. I mean, it's almost early evening now, and we're finding that temperatures have come up a lot. The wind's quite light, and that makes a difference to temperatures, I'm sure. But the sun's been baking down for quite a bit now, and it's a really comfortable bit of passage. The only thing I'm fully aware of is there's more sand up everywhere, and there's less water underneath our keel. A couple of boats on the dry over there, sitting there. And that's an entrance to a drying marina in Fellinelli. A drying marina, just like the one I stay in. Except the gangway's not meant to be a drying marina. Well, we're actually starting to make a decent turn of speed now. I know it don't look like, but you can see by the yacht staying still and the land moving behind them that our pace has picked up considerably. We're still just under one sail and the wind hasn't changed much, but we're now getting 3.7 over the ground and 3.9 through the water. That means that we're only pushing 0.2 of a knot here, which isn't a fantastic amount to push. But this was ebb, and this ebb is going to turn into flood, and the flood is going to carry on coming in the same direction that it's coming at the moment, but it will start picking up a bit of pace. The air is now getting a little bit lighter at only 6 knots. We're doing 2.4 still over the ground and 2.6 through the water. So the boat's still going really well. By the way, it's not an accident that she's going well. I cleaned all the bottom off and put a fresh coat of anti-foul on, and I changed all the weird lumpy anodes to smooth ones, and it seems to have made quite a bit of difference to the way she slips through the water, and she's doing a lot better and I can feel it. Now you must agree, in only 6 knots of wind and pushing tide, for the bow to be pushing through the water like this is quite good for Swallow. Well, I think it's absolutely excellent for Swallow. I think she's really lifted her petticoat up and she's moving a lot better than she ever has before. It's tea break time, so I'm having a Mr. Kipling's and a cup of tea. In these beautiful surroundings, just take a look. Please excuse me filling my face while I'm panning the camera. The wind's increased a little bit now to about 9 knots behind us, and it's given us the through the water speed of 3.5 to 4 knots. But that's not pushing us very well. We're down to 2.6, 2.7 knots, so we're fighting a bit more current now, which is only going to increase as we carry on. Now, after Fellinelli, you come up to Plasmeni Training School, and the boats are normally hanging out there if they're not sailing on the moorings. Well, as we approach them, you can see that the wind is pushing them over the tide, and you know there's a fair bit of tide, or should I say flood. And it's pushing them over the flood, and that's a merit to how slippy those little J-class boats are. I mean, in only 8 knots of wind up the chuff, no sails up, just a drag on the hull and the mast, there's enough for that boat to be making into 2 knots of current. That's pretty good, isn't it? Right, it's time for us to shoot over towards the island and the dry banks. And I mean 0.5, I dry out at 0.3. There's a foot of water underneath my keel. Pure panic. No, it's not really. I'm not bothered if I run aground. If I run aground, I run aground. The water's coming in, so I won't be there for long. And it's a sandy bottom. And how I know it's a sandy bottom is I can see the sand up everywhere. It also says it on the charts though. Well, I'm glad I'm here a little bit early and not over there where I can see a sandbank up. And with only 12 to 14 inches still underneath my keel, I can feel my heart beating inside my life jacket a bit. Now this next bit, when you get inside the sandbank here, we're right over by the Isle of Anglesey now, as close as we can get, and there's two odd little boys that drag you over here. There's a deep spot, 5.7 metres. That's much better than the 12 inches we had a couple of minutes ago. But there's a payoff. Every bit of water that's now coming as the flood is pouring through this patch, and that's why it's deep. Now as you can see, we're still making 3 knots through the water over, but we're not moving now at all against the land. We've come to a dead stop. We can't push our way through this little bit of water. It's got us held on the spot. A quick check on the GPS and that confirms we're making anything up to a knot over the ground. So while we're making something, I'll sit on that, because we've still got 8 to 10 knots of wind behind us, and that's still power. We've got a bit of sea room either side of us, and there's our destination. We can see all the way over there, those blurry buildings, Caernarfon. Well, as we make our way over to this green buoy over here, the actual area that we've got to get through narrows up a little bit, and as it's going to narrow up a little bit, even though we're actually making a good cut through the water and flying along, it's actually going to slow us up a little bit more. And if it slows us up a knot, we've had it. Well, God bless Swallow. She's putting in a grand performance. She's flying along with virtually no wind, and we've got up to this green buoy and we just don't seem to be able to get past it. Now it looks like we're actually slowly crawling past it, but we've been here for about 5 to 10 minutes already sitting on this green buoy, and we tend to go forward a little bit, and then when we next look at it, we tend to have gone backwards a little bit, and then forwards a little bit, and then backwards a little bit. So we're not actually getting anywhere at this moment in time, and we're sitting here waiting for a little bit of a gust of wind to pick us up that little bit extra and push us past this buoy. Well, 20 minutes later we put the engine on. We've got to get past the buoy, and the tide's speeding up against us. And you can see the strength of this flood coming in now on C14. It's well hammering into it. Well, there's just not enough wind for us to combat that, and that's why we had to add to it. But even with the motor assisting the sail, we're still finding it hard to squeeze through this gap, where there's now over 5 knots of current pushing into us. Well, we just get a little bit of a breeze just when we need it, and it started pushing us past this red can, and if we can get past this red can, we can get out of the flood, and you can see how powerful the flood is by how quickly the sand's covering. Well, get out of it by 100 yards or so, and you can turn the engine back off and just leave it back up to the sail. We're now back to making a pleasurable 1 knot over the ground, and we've still got 3.3 through the water, which is very good. What's our wind? We've got still nearly around 10 knots of wind, which is good. So that's plenty of power for us, and it's right up the chuff at the moment. Little bit more speed is what we want. Oh, and it's getting up to 1.6 over the ground now. Well, we're coming up to the final bit now. Caernarfon's just there ahead of us. It looks really close, but we're still pushing a hell of a lot of flood coming in against us. We've got good speed now. I mean, we're nearing 4 knots, and don't forget we're still in light airs. But the Menai Straits on flood is a formidable thing to push. So as long as the actual flood doesn't get past 4 knots here, we're still going to be making all the time. As long as we're continuing to keep our 4 knots through the water, that is. And as you can see, this buoy, we're only creeping past it. So there must be at least 3 knots of flood going on. Well, we push on, and we push on, and we push on. And before we know it, we're getting towards the last green before we get to Caernarfon itself. Wind stays about the same, about 10 knots, and we're still making a knot over the ground. So we've clawed our way up against 3 knots of flood, and I'm very pleased with that. I know, of course, some of you will be thinking, you shouldn't be going against the flood, you should be going with it. But then we would have been another 6 hours plus, and we would have been arriving in the dark, and the wind's been available for us to use and sail freely anyway. So it's just good that we've enjoyed it and made it. Just spoken to Johan on the VHF, coiled our sail away, banged the motor on, and we're ferry gliding in the entrance now into Victoria Dock. Visitors' berths, as soon as you get through the gate, turn to starboard and there's a big long pontoon there. That's where we're heading for. We're very lucky because when we get there, there's a nice open stretch and we don't have to raft up. And Johan said it's been quite a quiet bank holiday up to now and very little people have been turning up. But then I don't know why, because it's lovely out there. So what a cracking day sail we've had. A mistimed error there, and it stuck another hour on us and took another metre of water from under our keel. But we've arrived safely anyway. So, hip hip hooray, that were a great day.